this is Mango. This is the third of a multi-part series where we're going to explore the high-level overview of demographics and its geopolitical impacts. In part two, we continue building theoretical knowledge. We looked at trade and a country's TFR. In this one, we're going to look at what causes falling birth rates, forecasting, and globalization and demographics. So what impacts TFR and why have they been falling? So this is the main one. Years ago, we were mostly an agrarian society, and then the Industrial Revolution came along. So when you're on a farm, more kids meant more free labor, so you had as many as possible. When a country industrializes, people move from the farms to the cities and live in tight quarters. When you're in a city, you no longer need kids to do the farm work, and children become an expense. On a farm, there was a lot of space. You had the room to put up extra kids. In cities, you might live in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, and so it's hard to have a TFR of 5. In short, in agrarian societies, children are assets. In an industrialized setting, kids are an expense. Also, medicine has gotten better over the years, meaning child mortality has dramatically reduced the need to have a bunch of kids, hoping that half will make it to adulthood. So the more space you have to expand, the better birth rates are, and different countries industrialized in different years and at different rates. The rule of thumb is the faster a country industrialized, the faster the birth rates fell. So you have like Great Britain, who it's been 7 generations since they started industrializing, US and Germany 5, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan 2 to 3 generations, and China at 1.5 generations. Now, there were other factors contributing to declining birth rates, such as messaging efforts in the 60s and 70s, and even the 80s about global overpopulation. But the really big one is just space and the ROI of children. So next up, we'll talk about using demographics to forecast what might be in store for us at the national and global level. All right, let's dive into trends that we can use to predict what might happen based on demographics. One way to gauge the demographic health of a country is to look at the ratio of retirees to the under 15-year-old cohort. So we take a look at the number of retirees in the US versus those under 15. For the US, the ratio is 0.6. So let's look at the ratio state by state in the US. If you look at the legend, the lighter the blue, the younger the state. The redder, the older the state. In the case of the United States, the oldest states are yellow. So with Florida, it makes sense because that's where the retirees move to. West Virginia also makes sense because the youth tend to leave as soon as they can. Texas, Utah, and Alaska are our youngest states. So remember this. In the US, the oldest states are yellow. Let's take a look at Europe. The youngest country is Turkey, followed by Ireland. But by and large, Europe is already in a demographic crisis. And remember what we said about the older cohort voting more conservative? Does European politics begin to make more sense? Does the inflow of migrants into Europe make a bit of sense? And what is the relationship between these countries? So let's pretend there was no EU and these countries had to trade with one another and only one another. What would their trading relationship look like? It would be a bunch of countries that look like this, competing for markets. This leads to conflict. So why do you think they haven't devolved into conflict? Well, in large part, it's because they found markets elsewhere outside of Europe. The primary reason is because they've been exporting their goods elsewhere, such as those in Group A, plus Asia. This diagram is sort of what the globe looks like right now. This isn't totally representative of reality because the US looks more like a chimney these days, but the US is the largest rich market that absorbs the goods produced by the EU and Asia. Another flaw with this diagram is the relative wealth of country A inhabitants. The US and Oceania are rich first world countries. Southeast Asia and Latin America aren't as well off and have a lower limit to the amount of goods they can absorb, whereas the EU and East Asia are highly productive and can generate a lot of goods. The point is, there are still more goods those in Group B can create than can be absorbed by those in Group A. Speaking of the US demographics is the best of the industrialized world that also has a large population. Birth rates aren't great, but they're not terrible. It makes up for its low TFR with immigration. There are actually 4 settler states in the world: US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Being a settler state makes it easier for immigrants to integrate into society, so this makes the settler states more attractive to immigrate to. And the US also has a secret weapon, which is the H-1B visa, to bring in knowledge workers. So let's mention briefly about the US's neighbors, and let's pose some questions we can discuss more during our meetup. We talked about how the US has a chimney-like shape and we have the retiring boomers, and we also have the millennials who are in the upper end of the consumption cohort now. So what shape demographic works well as a US partner? And what do we think about Canada? Are they a partner? Are they a competitor? What are they? And in 10 to 20 years, when the millennials enter into the investment cohort in full force, what do you think our relationship with Canada might look like? And what about Mexico? Are they a good partner over the next few decades? Why or why not? As an aside, Mexico is the 10th largest country by population, so their population is nothing to sneeze at. How about the EU? Are they a good partner over the next few decades? Why or why not? What do you think is likely to happen with relations based purely on demographics alone? This is just food for thought. All right, let's talk very briefly about globalization. This is the Bretton Woods Hotel in New Hampshire. So after World War II, the US instituted the Bretton Woods Agreement, so named because the policy was agreed to at this hotel. At the time, the US had an economy larger than all the other countries combined, and this agreement was designed to do 2 big things. One is to prevent another world war because Americans were tired of getting dragged into world wars, and the other was to counter the USSR, who had stolen the secrets of nuclear weaponry. What resulted from this is the US would not only use its US Navy to protect trade for those part of the Bretton Woods system, but would allow these countries to export whatever goods they could to sell to the US market. Remember, these are countries that have been devastated during World War II, so they were desperate to rebuild their countries and rebuild their wealth, and they were given the opportunity to do so through exports to the United States. In other words, the Bretton Woods Agreement could only have happened in part because, 1, the US had mostly an intact economy, unlike everyone else, and 2, the US had a large consumption base to soak up all those goods. And 3, the US had the only functional navy left that could patrol the waterways. So from a demographic point of view, had the US been either a chimney shape or an investor-heavy demographic, the Bretton Woods policy would have failed. All right, last but not least, I wanted to touch upon my concerns. Obviously, the economic implications, the security implications are a problem based on global demographics. And the more minds we can throw at this problem, the better. The one for me that is personal is unless we find a very creative fix for the demographic challenges we see, women's rights will continue to diminish, and not just in the US. Repealing Roe v. Wade in the US, decriminalizing spousal abuse in Russia, and possibly worse in China are issues. This is a big-ass hairy problem, and I'm hoping to get more minds working on it and finding creative solutions to this problem. And if I'm honest about it, this is a touchy problem that requires a woman to bring it up to talk about for obvious reasons. So, hell, I'm a woman, I should talk about it. And we can discuss more about what has been tried and what will probably work during our meetup. The other topic we'll go over during our session is policies such as maternity leave and universal health care, and why some countries implement them and others don't. I'm guessing it might be obvious to some of you by now, now that you have a high-level understanding of demographics, but we'll go ahead and talk about it. All right, so we're almost done. Next up are our case studies, so I'll see you there.